Well, hello there. Welcome to the first ever, the very first Business Jam live event. It's been a while coming, but now we're here. So this is where that's myself and guests, take a look at innovation, reinvention, curiosity, knowledge, exploration. And we're not really we like shiny gadgets, but that's not the focus. But want to explore all these attitudes that help us to invent and solve some of the issues that we currently face. So please feel free to comment on whatever social media platform you are watching on. That's if there is anyone out there. We hope there is. So before we go any further, can I just tell you, for the Facebook listeners anyway, there is a fudge. You have to, if you don't want to comment as a Facebook user, you actually have to do that. chat.restream.io/FB. And that means that if you comment and we feature your comment, then instead of saying Facebook user, it'll say Fred Blogs or whatever. So that's all we need to do. So to the main event, our guest for today. Our guest is, or so he claims, a former scientist, HR director, business consultant, musical producer, professional storyteller, non-executive director even of a rugby team, a zoo, and a talent company. He's fascinated by disruptive technologies and what their impact is and could be on the future of work. So without further ado, let me welcome Scott McArthur.
Hello. How you doing, Derek?
I'm doing absolutely fine. You look like you're doing better than me. I saw the coffee going in just off air there, so that's fine. So that was a potted on history, if you like.
Yep.
So I've been following your exploits, I guess, for just over 2 years now. But how did you get to that point? What did you do? And then let's explore the different exciting bits that we know you have been doing.
Well, I guess go back to the beginning. I was really interested in not very much at school, and I wanted to focus all my time on sport and other things you get up to when you're at school. But I got inspired. It was two things. It was Jacques Cousteau. Don't know if you remember Jacques Cousteau, Derek, and David Attenborough, and probably David Bellamy as well, actually. These sort of scientist types had a big impact on me when I was a kid, and despite where I was living, which was in sort of industrial Lanarkshire in the centre of Scotland, I decided I wanted to be a vet or a scientist, or I didn't really know what it meant, but that's how I got into that sort of area. So I went to university and I studied biology and psychology later on, and got a job as a scientist. So I did work for 3 years as a research scientist, doing all sorts of wonderful things. I can tell you a story later if you like, but mainly working on arthritis and a little bit of archaeology. We did some work in anthrax, and we did some work on sort of, I guess, archaeological tools. We were looking for medical tools in big blood sumps, which are all over the UK, where the priests used to bleed themselves to dampen their passions, and we used to dig into the rock that was formed by that blood to find the tools and food and remnants of that society. So it was really exciting. And then after that, I mean, science is great. I love it, but it was difficult to make a career in it because financially it was very, very difficult. So didn't know what to do, Derek. Came out of there and ended up on a graduate program with British Gas and into the sort of the HR world. They wanted me because I was new at it. It was back when HR had things like manpower planning. So I had to do all that for a few years, and that led to a 15-year career in HR, Derek. So that's how I kind of got into working in organizations. So it was via the scientific route, which I know is quite unusual.
That was the days, wasn't it? Not when HR was known as human resources.
No, it's right. My most, I remember the day I got a job. I got promoted from being a personnel assistant, right, to being a personnel officer. And that was amazing. I mean, that was the day that I'll never forget that day. And I'll tell you, it's even funnier than that because I was personnel officer, and in brackets, I was responsible for welfare and relocation. And Thatcher soon did away with welfare. Companies were stripping out everything back then, and welfare was one of the first things to go. So that job only lasted about 18 months, but it's so funny now, Derek, that all the companies are talking about welfare again, which is really interesting. So yeah, so after that, after my HR career, I kind of worked in education in the HR department. I worked in a construction company in the HR department. So I got around a little bit. I ended up in a food company, which was fabulous. I love manufacturing, absolutely love it. But during that process, I got to meet some folks from companies like Accenture and Deloitte, Capgemini, Atos, etc. And after being nudged a few times to do it, I took the jump and went into big consulting. And that was probably the most formative part of my whole career. I spent 10 years in there, and I went around the world 3 times. I worked in hundreds of different, literally hundreds of companies. Did deals. As the biggest deal I was ever involved in was over $1 billion. It was, I mean, I did 2 Olympic Games. It was amazing. I loved it. But during that time, I think a lot of consultants find that certainly in the big consultancy firms, it gets quite tiring. You mean, you're doing long weeks in multiple countries, and it got to the point where basically I'd had enough. And I then thought, well, what can I start doing? And I started off looking at music because I'm very passionate about music, and as you kindly mentioned, I ended up being a producer on a musical up in Scotland that did really well. I think we got 11,000 people over the space of 3 or 4 days, so it went really well. But that wasn't going to make me money, so I thought, well, what else can I do? And it was actually my partner Samantha said to me, well, look, you're good at talking. Why don't you try getting into that game? So I took the leap again, I guess, to form my own company. But then I got snapped up doing lots of consultancy work, and it was probably another 7 years before I was able to comfortably push the consulting work away and start focusing on being a professional storyteller and speaker.
So
That's about it, Derek.
does that take us up to about the point where our path, or maybe just before our paths crossed?
Yeah, just about.
Yeah, because you were definitely telling stories at
Yeah,
that point, but there was still a hint of consultancy there, I think, or it
yeah,
felt like it. But I
yeah,
think the interesting bit, and hopefully the interesting bit
yeah.
for people who might be watching in, is what's happened actually from that point, because everybody has had to pivot,
Yes. Yeah.
raised eyebrows and juggling eyeballs like that. They've had to make changes, but a million and one other things have happened along the way, and
Yeah.
some have gone faster than others, and you seem to have gone faster than many. So, have you changed
Yeah.
direction, or what's caused you to change direction, or what has been the inspiration for you doing
Mm.
what you've been doing?
That's a really nice question, and one that is I actually asked myself that question quite a lot because I think what happened was, well, I know what happened to everybody else, like everybody else. COVID hit my business really badly. I think I had 23 keynote stroke speaking engagements booked in the diary. And then 3 days later, they were all gone. That hurt. And if I'm absolutely honest, Derek, I went off the rails a little bit for a couple of weeks because I'd been working up to this for 2 years, well, I guess halfway through when we met. And it was all going really, really well. I mean, I'd done a national pub tour speaking. I mean, you were at a couple of, I think you came to one in London. Actually, I think you took some photographs for me. But I mean, I did a gig in Manchester when there was 2 people there. I did one in Birmingham when there was 10 people there. And it was building and it was building and it was building. And at the same time, I was getting, quite a few bookings to do corporate speaking. And I'd just done a pub gig in London. I'd started in London and finished in London, and 350 people turned up for that gig. So it was a proper gig. I mean, it was like being a comedian, not that I'm that funny, but it was like, I felt like it was like how a comedian must feel. So I did 19 gigs all over the UK, and it was going really well. And I'd taken bookings across different sectors and all the rest of it, and it just whap. And it really upset me. I mean, and I spent too much time in the pub, I have to say. It was, well, at home drinking beer. Then I realized that I should eat some of my own teaching, I guess. They always say if you want to learn something, you should teach it. And I always say to people, get on. So I thought, well, what will I get on with? And I'd done a little bit of virtual delivery, just a little bit. I'd done some for Marks and Spencers. We did a course on leadership at Marks and Spencers using the virtual technology. So I had a little tiny bit of experience of it. And I thought, well, okay, let's just do something. And I sat down, Derek, and I went, right, what can I talk about? Because normally, as you know, I talk about the future of work, but that's quite a big topic. I wanted to narrow it down. And again, having spoken to a couple of friends, including you actually, and some other people, they all said, well, you're a good storyteller, Scott. Why don't you talk about stories? So I launched a podcast, a vlog rather, talking about stories. And that, along with my, I do another one in the music industry, it was another thing that happened because I had the space during lockdown. So I've done these two broadcasts, and I think we've done 125 episodes now. It's over 300 hours of broadcasting, and I just learned as I went along. I had a rubbish camera, I had average kit, but again, I didn't focus on the kit. I just wanted to get out there and start speaking, and I started to do that, and that's developed. And then that, in the last few months, since things have relaxed a little bit, it started to pay off because I'm now taking bookings. I've got a Ned role, which is the first one I've had in a while. The first one I've wanted in a while, that came towards me because of this stuff. So yeah, so that was it really. And now I'm in an interesting place. We'll probably get to this, but should I go back and do what I used to do? I don't know at the moment. I've got some thoughts on it, but again, I guess like many people, I'm at that edge of next moment, and I don't really know where I'm going next, Derek, but I'm working on it.
But you'll go there anyway.
Oh, aye.
and decide where you are when you get there.
Yeah,
Which
exactly.
is, yeah, I mean, that's almost the next bit. But the thing that might intrigue some people who are listening in
Yeah.
is the title of this episode, Consilience.
Yeah.
I first heard it when I listened to you speak at a PSA event.
Right. Okay.
But it has many definitions if you look it up. It's all to do with. Well, I'll let you talk about what it's to do with.
Right.
because people can Google it.
Yeah. It's not a word and it's disappointing for me that it's not in the public lexicon. But in the scientific world, and this is the way I interpret it. So there are, other definitions are available. But when I was studying biology, there were a number of heroes, a number of people who were, very important to every young biologist. And one of those was a chap who just died, called Edward O. Wilson. And Edward is an ant expert, believe it or not. And he's working on he was working on understanding education, understanding learning, understanding, how humanity lives with the planet, etc. And one of the things he picked up on, and there's a whole history of this. It's not he didn't have the idea, but as often with great scientists, he was following on from other great scientists. And he wrote, I've got the book here. He wrote this book, Consilience, and he calls it the unity of knowledge. And put in a nutshell, what it means is that if something is likely to be probably true, scientists never talk about, this is something people have a complete misconception about scientists. They never talk about that's a fact. They talk about probabilities. And this whole book and a lot of Wilson's work was about showing where there is multiple routes of evidence from different, another scientist called it magisteria. So you'll have the arts, the humanities and the arts, you'll have science, you'll have history, you'll have all the big chunks of activity. The more that these things come to a similar conclusion about something, the more likely it is that what you're studying is probably a reflection of reality.
Yeah,
And
that's what I think. Well, my wife goes all about it in some of the work she does, but it's what
yeah,
people call triangulation, effectively, isn't that?
yeah, it is, and it can be bigger than that. I mean, one of the best
Yeah.
examples, probably the best example actually, is funny enough. It's another one of the scientific heroes, which was Darwin, and his theory of evolution by natural selection. The last time I looked, and I'm out of date now, but the last time I looked, there was 140 different disciplines had come to the same conclusion based on research that evolution by natural selection was probably a reflection of reality, which means that it's evolution is a very consilient idea.
Mm.
It's very difficult to find any other, it is the prime theory on the nature of how we and all the other animals and plants evolve. So that's a very consilient piece. It's one of the most consilient things there is in the planet. So I'm fascinated by it, because if you get, and Wilson was the same, because he loved the idea of the arts and the sciences having similar ideas on subjects that actually coalesced.
Mm.
And I love that. And funny
Yeah.
enough, in your space, in creativity, innovation, etc., there is quite a lot of consilient ideas there that are
Yeah.
very, very useful.
Yeah.
That they're not just folk talking BS. It's actually stuff that there's evidence for, from different ways
Yeah.
of thinking about the
Yeah.
world.
I must admit, I had a read around the consilience topic, and I
Mm.
noticed that actually in the world of arts, there are actually people now just using the term consilience. They're not actually calling.
No, yeah, well,
So
it's always thus, Derek, isn't it? People pick up on words and they don't actually know what they mean.
yeah,
Just,
yeah. Well, yeah. Indeed.
yeah,
But
yeah,
the other thing is, in terms of using it with the arts and in the world of innovation,
yeah.
um, I suppose you're stretching, or could be stretching um, the term consilience.
Mm,
But because in the world of innovation, we're not actually necessarily looking for proof. What we're actually looking for or gathering is the knowledge, but not
yeah.
necessarily coming to a conclusion, because you want to use the knowledge to create new knowledge.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, the
So
way in back in the day when I worked, I mean, I used to head up a unit called basically it was an innovation unit. It was called the Impact Team, and our role was in the creativity and innovation space. And like a lot of the big consultancy companies, they're packed with very clever people, but they're not packed with people from across the magisteria, as I said earlier.
yeah,
So one of the things that I did, and it was great fun. We had I was asked to work with 30 of the sales guys in one of these companies, and I do, I had to help them with their pitching and help them get their messages clear. And we had an artist in there as well, helping them visualize what their products looked like, etc. But we then pulled a fast one. The chief executive, she's called Ursula. She's still there, and her and I sat down. We said, we need to give these guys something challenging. So what we did was we did a Dragon's Den. Now that isn't a clever idea. Everybody's done that sort of thing. But what we didn't tell them, so these 30 people all walked in and they had to present their piece to the Dragon's Den. There was me, Ursula, and a couple of other technical guys on the panel. But what they didn't know was that we'd invited their families to be the audience. And by goodness, you have never seen 30 people's faces change completely,
mm,
ashen. And it was so interesting because they couldn't BS. They had to watch acronyms because some wee boy would say, "Excuse me, daddy, what does that mean?" And they really had to know their stuff. And I'll tell you what, that's one of the best events I've ever been at, because it really put these people under real pressure that they didn't expect. And ideas came out, mate. It was brilliant. It just kept coming out, because they were challenged they were met by a different audience. So based on that, we then used to bring, and I remember having one we went and had a partnership with the National Opera down at Covent Garden in London, and we got the opera singers to be the audience. So we really went for it. We
yeah,
went for different types of people, and it was terrific. I'm very, very proud of that work, and I did it with a guy called Greg. I don't know if Greg's watching, but Greg Stewart was his name. Fantastic! It was
yeah.
just a great period, great
The more
example of
the more different you can make the experiences,
yeah,
the better.
yeah,
And also in a social context, in social innovation, you can
yeah,
piggyback things on that.
yeah,
So you can piggyback information gathering
yeah,
about health, about social deprivation on the music, on the arts. Uh, It's yeah, it's you're not hoodwinking people. You're just making
no,
people forget.
yeah.
I wouldn't say lower their guard, but that their
Mm.
natural defences aren't going to come up and they'll
Yes.
just do what they do.
Yes. Yes. I mean,
Um,
I work really hard on, you know, really trying to understand people that are nothing like me. So I've got two or three, well, one composer and a couple of artists that I really, really admire. And it's particularly, I mean, one of them, a guy called Celaya, who's a Cuban artist. It's just outrageous. I mean, his artwork is good, but it's more to do with his process.
hmm,
Uh, I just find it so I mean, he will write a book about one painting and how he got to that point. And funny enough, he's an ex-physicist as well, so there's quite an interesting thing there. But I find that sort of brain very, very interesting. And there's another one called John Luther Adams, who's a modern classical music composer, and his whole approach is just so different to anyone in the corporate world that I find it truly inspiring, and I
hmm.
try to, learn from that. Don't always like what they do. I'm sure they don't like what I do, but it's something that really challenges you, and for me, it keeps me honest, I think, and it changes my mind about a lot of things, and I think that's important, being able to
The thing
change
is,
your mind.
it's quite easy for people like us to go and search out people like that in a
Yeah,
way. Not that everybody does or should,
no,
but it is quite easy to.
yeah,
But how would you introduce some of these ideas, these concepts, these people
yeah,
to should we say people in the corporate world, to
yeah.
bigger companies?
Well, I remember. I'll tell you a little story. I remember the first time that we really went for it with a group. And I must give the guys the rightful name. His name was Steve Whitler, and Steve is one of the leading proponents of systems thinking, I think, in the UK, if not beyond. He's an amazing guy. And what we did was we took some of the principles of understanding from the artistic domain. So how does an artist see something? How does an artist form a picture or a piece of music or whatever of something they're observing? And a lot of the time with art, it's observational and then translational. And we basically, I mean, it was amazing, Derek. We had this massive, I mean, how big was it? Two double-decker buses, absolutely huge wall, and we then put what was it? Like artist canvas on the wall, and then we cut it up into doable like big A1 type pieces, and we gave it out to the company, and it was a technology company. And Steve took us through a process and saying, right, okay, we're gonna come up with this picture of the organization based on it, and he gave us some rules, but you were not allowed to use words and you were not allowed to use data, and we got them to paint the organization. It was absolutely brilliant. I mean, you had 50 different groups, people, sorry, in the room painting. Maybe it was maybe 8 by 8, so it was quite a lot of panels, and it was absolutely fascinating. And we used that as an exhibition. We rolled it out, and the best bit there, the best bit, one, it was fun, it was great fun, but two, when people then walked around the exhibition and looked at other people's work, and it didn't matter if they were good at drawing or painting or whatever, it didn't matter. They'd go, "What does that mean?" Or the first question, most of them said, "Where am I in that picture? What is that depicting?" And that as a conversation starter is utterly amazing. I mean, I've now done a couple hundred of these. I mean, we've done, all over the world, in fact, done these pictures, and it really is powerful, really, really powerful. So if you're tuning in and you want to see somebody that's good at it, there's a chap called Julian Burton, there's a chap called Steve Whitler. As I said, they are, I think, two of the best people in the country at doing this sort of thing. So that was a real example,
Mm,
Derek, where we didn't just use it. I mean, quite often companies I think, make the mistake of just having
mm.
music and art as edutainment. They have it at a conference to, get everybody
Yeah,
singing or whatever. But actually, there is agency in it.
or they can be.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. They
Yeah,
can be.
it's intention. So I
Yeah,
think we've impressed Morag. I'm certain she'll be coming
well,
back to
hello,
me at
Morag.
some point on that.
Yeah, Yeah.
Yes, yes, we love things like that.
Yeah.
But have you ever used food? That's what I want to know.
Food, I have. Yeah, I have used food, and twice. We used to have a thing called Walk and Talk, WOK and Talk.
Hmm.
And what we did was we hired the place, you know, these teriyaki places, you know, the ones with
Yeah,
the chef, and we would actually try it with food to make, you know, what food, what would be the dish be for this meeting, what would the dish be for this
yeah,
company. So it's not quite as creative as perhaps art is, but the walk and talk thing worked because what we did was we gave them a challenge, and they had to go and talk about the challenge, but then they had to instruct the chef on what dish to make. That was the talk part of it. So it was walk
yeah,
and talk.
yeah,
So we did that mainly. That was again mainly in the technology world, but I also did it with some retail companies. So yeah, we did it. And music's
yeah,
the other one. We've done it with music quite a lot,
yeah.
and we both know some people
We do
that
indeed.
continue to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I accidentally did it once with food. I didn't intend to. It was at an association of MBAs event, which I
Right.
organised. And I've been doing this thing about modelling organisations. And most people, you do it with, you can do it with Lego. You can do it
Yeah.
with all sorts.
Marshmallows or whatever. Yeah.
Whatever. I just had
Yeah.
I just had a load of stuff there for
Yeah.
people to model their organisation with, not intending for them to use any particular thing. And it
Yes.
was before we had the buffet, but the buffet was there in the room.
Right.
And as with these things, you don't tell people what to do, but if they go off and do it, you just let them. And they did all their modelling with the buffet. You know, no, there was sausages on sticks and sandwiches and
Excellent.
little sort of
Excellent.
like cocktail umbrellas and
Yes.
all sort. But you know, if people want to do that, the other thing that people love
Yeah.
is writing where they shouldn't.
Yes, absolutely. I've done that
I
as well. Yeah.
I came across a company who are into cardboard packaging,
Right.
anything from like thin packaging for Mars bars in supermarkets
Yeah.
to industrial crates for car engines. And
Right.
so, what we did, we cleared all the furniture out of the room we were using,
Yeah.
and they actually made for us cardboard tables and cardboard chairs
Wow. Right.
and
Okay.
a
Love it.
cardboard ideas wall amongst other things. But the
Yes.
point was, anything then could be written on, and they loved it. They'd write on the tables, and the people love it.
Brilliant. I remember
So,
again, Greg and I, we got into trouble once because we had this big fancy office in the centre of London, and there was actually there's a chap called Gar Reynolds. Now Gar's off having family at the moment, but he wrote a book called Presentation Zen. And in that book, he spoke about exactly what you've just described. And so me and Greg decided we were going to write on the windows. So we're up in this big tower block in London. We got the right sort of pen, so you could rub them out. But we did our whole analysis. It was an Olympic Games thing we were working on, and we did our whole analysis on the windows and left it overnight. And the next morning, we got called into the office and got a telling off from one of the partners because the cleaners were complaining that they had to clean the windows. But fortunately, Greg had taken a photograph of of the work. But actually, it was really interesting. I tell you, what was the most interesting part, Derek, was Greg and I were used to working together. That was fine. But the most interesting part was the number of people in the office that came up and said, "What are you guys doing?"
mm,
It sparked that,
yeah,
curiosity thing. What's Scott doing over there? I'm going to go and ask him. So they did, and of course they then started to add to the picture. So
yeah,
again, a bit like the art piece earlier, it was quite neat. It's like, yeah, you're absolutely right. It's
and
something that,
it's back to stories as well,
yeah, back to
because
stories. Yeah, of course.
because one of the things obviously about bad story is that if multiple people add, the story
Yeah,
can't be wrong.
it does help.
Everybody adds their perspective,
Yeah,
so
yeah, I agree.
everybody is right. And I can
Yes,
remember, I think it was Cadbury's many moons ago did
yeah,
exactly that as well, because I didn't realise this, but Cadbury's being founded as a Quaker company, they had,
yes,
I think they called it their creed. It was an old book which had the values of the company,
mm,
and they lost track of their values,
yeah,
and it was about the time. We're probably old enough to remember it when Cadbury's flakes stopped having twisty bits at the end and went to
yes,
being in like almost like cigars, and
yeah,
then they decided to reinvent them and put the twisty bits back
yeah.
because And it was about that time they thought, well, we've got to get the ethos of the company back, but
Yes.
they couldn't display they couldn't display the book,
Yeah.
but they decided to create the strategy and story and video.
Ah, right. Okay.
That's how they did it, but
Yeah.
using their employees.
Yes. Very
And
good.
so but there's any number of ways.
Oh yeah, it's great. I mean, the other one, if I may, was TNT. The logistics company.
Hmm.
Well, we did a project with them, and this was oh goodness, 15 years ago, right? So remember, if you were born before 1998, you're older than Google. So it was quite interesting, quite a while ago. But what we did was we gave them all little cameras, and they had to go off and record a day in the life of. So we gave about 100 cameras out to all these TNT employees, and then we brought it back. Now, obviously, we had professional editors involved, and we made a movie of it. It was about an hour and a half long. The chief executive, who was a bit of a character, I don't know if he's still there. I doubt if he's still there. He was an ex-footballer, actually. It was quite unusual. He absolutely loved it because it gave him a view of the company that he just didn't have. He had no idea. And the staff loved it. I mean, some of them were really naughty and were really rude, and others were really creative. So again, you get all these different types of people responding to the challenge of describe a day in the life of a TNT employee. So it was very good, and at its time, it was very, very innovative in itself. That methodology, that wasn't my idea; it was someone else's idea, but it was a really good idea. I thought easier to do nowadays.
Mm. And Simon has said, "Oh no, of course they can." I don't know what he's referring to, but it was after Moreg's comment about the food, which was, did they then eat their creations?
Yes, yeah.
Um, so who knows?
Who
Simon,
knows?
you're not supposed to be listening. You're supposed to be with clients all day. That's what you told me anyway. Never mind. But so
Thanks, Simon.
we've accidentally covered two of the major parts of innovation, if you like, which is
Yeah,
well more than two major parts, but creating the curiosity,
yeah,
somehow collating knowledge and ideas
yeah,
from absolutely everywhere, and also gaining
yeah,
that perspective. As you said, you've got a boss who has no idea
yeah,
about certain things,
yeah.
just his immediate subordinates and spreadsheets and things.
He was a nice man. He was a very, very nice person, and he was willing to learn. So I think,
So, I mean,
yeah,
there are examples of, I guess, bosses who are doing what we all want them to do. People like Ricardo Semler, for instance,
yeah,
he of Maverick fame. How do you talk about the future of work, but
yeah.
how do you see the future of work
Oh,
related to innovation?
um,
Let's narrow it down a little bit.
that's really interesting. I'm not sure. One of my guiding principles is if someone's certain, they're usually wrong. And I'm really not sure because there's so many directions that it could go in. What I am seeing, which isn't a surprise, it's totally normal human behavior. Most of the companies, most of the organizations that are talking about being innovative are basing that on the industrial revolution model that they've always had. So they're going to get what they always got more than likely. The other thing I know is that companies are not good at changing at all, even if it's possible. It's often just not possible. And I can give you chapter and verse on that from experience of multiple organizations from across the sectors. There are very few companies that have ever changed. However, I think the fact that I mean, I call it the inverted triangle. Where the people at the bottom of the triangle in a hierarchy are the ones that give the most value usually to the customer. So I like to think about inverting the influence of that triangle now and saying, okay, because of the last couple of years, Derek, I think that some people, not everyone, a lot of people just go to work to make a few quid and go home and go to the bar, go to the gym, go to a concert. They're not interested. This is another thing. People pretend that everybody's really interested. A lot of folk aren't. I would probably argue the majority couldn't care less. However, the ones that do care, they're starting to see possibilities for doing things slightly differently. Now, everybody predicted homework, and companies have been doing it for years. Everybody predicted structuring companies, Robin Dunbar's work that's been around for 20 or 30 years. The platform businesses that are around, that's been around for 20 years. It's only now becoming technology enabled. So that's not new. So where's it going? I don't quite know because it's so complex and there are so many things involved. It's difficult. However, I'll make three things I think are particularly interesting that the public don't always have their eye on. The first one is the obvious one everybody talks about, and I won't dwell on it, but that's technology, and in specific technologies around artificial intelligence. There are huge opportunities there for things to change, and for things like I interviewed Mike Hobday, who's the chief executive of a company called Antworks, one of the major AI companies, just last week on my own show. And he said, well, it's so exciting because what the public don't see is the rate of change. It is what's called exponential. And his perspective was, and I'm quoting Mike here rather than my own opinion, but his perspective was, it is about enriching lives in a different way at work and taking away a lot of the hassle. It's as simple as that. So I think the future of work might involve less hassle. I doubt if it'll involve less paper. Everybody talks about the paperless office. That's not going to happen anytime soon. But even last night, I was at a burn supper last night, Derek, as you'd expect. And next to me was a senior lawyer from one of the big legal firms in London. And she said, and this is obviously not a surprise to you and I, but she said, the job of a paralegal has gone, it's been taken out because all they did, very important role, but what they did was they looked at case studies and they looked back in time at what the case may be for a particular client. That's now been done by AIs and been done better, faster, and deeper than it's ever been done before. Major change. So the legal industry is having to really change because the natural hierarchy for progression, they all started as paralegals, has basically gone. Same thing has happened in medicine. When your GP, if you've ever been to a GP, we all know that nowadays they sit in front of a laptop looking at your symptoms and looking for outcomes. That's not a job for a human anymore. So that's going to be taken out. So all of that stuff's going to happen. So that's the more obvious stuff. But behind the scenes, there are two other technologies that I'm interested in that I think are really important, but aren't commonly on people's radar. The first one's biotechnology. One of the reasons we got to the vaccines for COVID so quickly is because in the biotechnology world, it is going so fast. It's extraordinary, and that will change everyone's lives. The digital computer's only got another 4 to 5, maybe 6 years, and it'll be replaced by analog computers. And that I'm not making that up. That's happening. That's where Apple are working on it, Google are working on it. This is the next stage, and that is going to be fascinating because things like technology storage. I mean, it's emergent, but if you've got a sugar cube of DNA, that could hold all of your data for all of your life and have room to spare. A piece of DNA, a cube of DNA that's the size of maybe a large table could take all the data in the world and have room to spare. So that is going to be absolutely revolutionary. Never mind cloud. That's going to be revolutionary. And I'm very fortunate to know a couple of people working in this space who are working with the third thing. And the third thing is nanotechnology. Very few companies are thinking about nanotechnology. In just the medical space, there's a company down here, it's at the University of Bristol. And there's 30 others in the world working on this, where they're designing micro robots. It's like sci-fi that can go into your body and they can sniff out cancer before it's even visible to the histologists, etc. And they can zap it and kill it. And my friend reckons we've got cancer within 10 years because of this technology, and there's multiple Nobel Prizes coming. And that's going to have a big impact on our health. It's going to have a big impact on how long we live. So there's a whole load of things coming, Derek, but I'm not certain how it's all going to pan out. But there are other things happening at that pace. But for me, AI, biotech, and nanotech are the holy trinity of disruptive technologies moving into the next 10 years. And it's not further away than 10 years. It's within the next 10 years, if not the next 5 years, that these things are going to start changing the world. So that's where I think it's going to go. But how it's going to be impacted, how it's going to be translated in organizations, I don't know. I mean, I think the primacy of the city in the UK will diminish. That's because, again, AIs are starting to do investments. AIs are starting to control pensions. So a lot of these things are going to diminish. And that's exciting because I think we've been too beholden to the city for far too long. They don't add value, significant value, or at least they think they do, but I don't believe they do today. Maybe they did 30 years ago, but today I don't think they add the same value. And that's not a political statement. It's just that these things could be done. I mean, one of my friends was, he sold carbon derivatives, and he had 10 people on his team 5 years ago. There's now him. Yeah. So that the technology has completely changed his working environment. And I think that sort of thing will change the relationship companies have with the city, etc. So that,
Oh, there's a question from Morag. She says, "What was that film again?"
which one did I mention?
You must have done.
I can't
You must.
remember. Sorry, Mona.
You must have done. Oh
Right.
well,
Oh, sorry.
if Morag can let us know the context, I'm sure we can ask
Oh,
the
tell me the
question
context,
again.
and I'll remember it. But I'm afraid
Yeah,
that
and
my
the other thing was that
oh, inner space. Yes, of
inner
course. Yes,
space.
inner space. Yeah, inner space is coming real. And I've actually, Morag, I've actually seen them doing a mock-up in a sports centre, and it was a white floor, white walls, white ceiling, and all these little robots that were about that size. It's obviously a prototype, and they had all these little robots, different colours, looking for the red robot, and the red robot was emitting something. I don't know what it was. I'm not close enough to it, but it was doing something, and they all sniffed around, and eventually they swarmed around it. And the technology, really, sorry, you got me going now. But the technology is based on murmurations, bird behavior when they form
Mm.
those big flocks. There's a type of maths called Boyd's mathematics, and they're using that algorithm to drive the robots. How cool is that? Yeah, so it's biology in action.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, Simon again. So he was taking exception with my statement. Everybody joins in. They can't be wrong.
Oh yes, they can. Is what I would say, Simon.
Well, he's agreeing. He was agreeing with you, but the
Yeah.
context of what we talked about was perspective,
Yeah. Yeah.
not actually making a decision. I'm right. I'm not. Yes,
No.
people can be wrong, and if you're
Yes,
talking about
absolutely.
consilience, then I guess some people can be wrong,
Yeah, and should
or
be.
they can be less right. I think
Yes,
is the way of putting it. But
that's the better way of putting it.
but a perspective is a perspective, and you can't argue against that, can you?
No, you can disagree
So
with it though.
you can disagree with it, but you can't
Mhm.
actually say it's wrong. The other thing I was going to do was try and get me back up by the side of you, but for some unknown reason, I've got a spinner on there. I can't.
Oh, gremlins,
Yeah,
gremlins.
there's gremlins in the restream system. So
Yeah, I mean, yesterday. Oh, there you
occasionally,
go.
I
Oh,
can do that, but I can't do the side to side stuff. So yes, we've all answered Moreg's question. I don't know. We've seemed to have gone all over the place.
well, that's good though. That's good.
Oh, yeah, if somebody replays this, there must be some little gems in there somewhere.
Yes.
Mustn't there? Mm,
Yeah.
he says. So yeah, those are the technologies, but with your human resources or human remains hat on,
Yeah.
depends what actual skills are we actually going to need?
Right. That's a massive question.
Well,
One of the things that
give me a massive answer then.
oh well, I could have. Yeah, you don't want to make it talk for an hour. But one of the things that as a young scientist, right? I remember looking at the prospects for a biologist back in the 1980s, early 90s, and it was terrible. There wasn't any. There was a few of the research laboratories, some of them in universities, other were some commercial research labs, but really weren't many opportunities. 18 months ago, New Scientist looked at all the STEM subjects as they do every year. If you're interested in this, just go into New Scientist and Google skills required. And biological skills have gone from being second bottom out of 30 to the top. That is amazing. And again, the public aren't aware of that. It's not in the public consciousness, but the biology skills, the understanding, everything from genetics to group dynamics to all these skills are starting to be required by organizations. And of course, as we move towards the analog generation of computers which are coming, they are of course biological stroke technological entities, and that's going to require more biological skills. So if I was 18 again, I would do exactly what I did before, Derek, but I'd have more of a chance of staying in at this time than I had 30 years ago. So for me, that's one of the skills, just pure biology skills. But I think and again, I don't know the answer to this. I'm just going to speculate. I do think that having a range of skills, I mean, in big consulting anyway, they used to talk about a T, and you'd
Mm,
have your speciality. So I'll make it up. Say it's me, biology. That would be my deep skills. But then they would develop you in the top of the T, and they would say, okay, we need to get 2 things that you can do very, very well when you go into a company. Not as good as your biology, but you can do just as well. And back to my consulting days, they trained me in procurement and they trained me in architecture, technology architecture. So I was, my T was change management and architecture and procurement. And that meant that I could be used more out in different companies as a consultant. And I think more people should think about that. So I would love to see people doing, if we're talking about, a certain level, to go to university, by all means do your chemistry degree, but do your master's in history, or do your PhD in the art, because I think that grounding, much more varied grounding, is going to be much more needed. Whereas before, and even to some extent now, it was about deep specialization. I think now we're going to need to have more of a breadth as well as that specialization. I hope that makes sense. And that means that when you come out and you go into industry, if that's what you choose to do, you'll have more opportunities. And it's great to see companies. I mean, companies have never been good at developing their people. The way companies deal with needing a skills gap is they sack somebody and bring in someone with the skills. I mean, I know that's quite glib, but when I was an HR director for 15 years, that's what they do, right? Despite all the stuff you read in the papers. But I think moving forward, that breadth of knowledge, or that breadth of interest, curiosity, is going to be something that will put you in a very positive position as you go into industry moving forward into the new future of work.
Could we either help the companies or head them off at the pass to stop them sacking people by actually educating people lower down? I've been talking to both universities and colleges in India, and they seem quite startled when, although they like the idea. But for instance, I was talking to an engineering college, and I was saying, well, look, your students, why aren't you teaching them all about creativity?
Yeah.
If you've got architecture students, why aren't you teaching them about creativity? Because all they're going to do is put up these steel structures with cladding on the outside.
Yeah.
And where are the gherkins going to come from?
Yes.
Where are the Lamborghinis going to come from?
Yes.
If
Yes.
nobody actually has that creativity.
Yes. No, we're on the
So,
same page. On the same page.
yeah, we're almost back to Ken Robinson, aren't we?
Yeah. Well, Ken got it right. I mean, he got it
He
right.
did.
Yeah.
He did indeed. Yeah.
Yes.
Kids are creative, and we educate them not to be creative.
Absolutely.
Then we send them
Absolutely.
to work where they say, you've got to go on a creativity course.
Yes. Crazy. But
So,
I mean, they're not. I mean, I don't know what your experience has been, but certainly the MBA programs that I've taught on and experienced didn't have creativity within it anyway. It's like, it's bizarre. It's just it's not something that is taught in the non artistic disciplines. It's just not, and it's a shame. It's a shame. It's the
it
same at
is indeed.
school, isn't it? It's just the same.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Morag, thank you for tuning in. So I think we've just about exhausted our time. We could have you back again in a few months, and you use up another nearly hour,
Yeah.
I think.
I think we could manage that quite easily,
I
Derek.
think we could. So anyway, thanks for coming along, Scott. It's been a hoot, blast, interesting, and I'm
Th-
sure the audience loved listening to you more than they love listening to me.
Well, thanks
But
for letting me
but
be there.
it's been good fun, and I'm sure we will be exchanging many more ideas in the coming weeks, months, years, whatever.
Thanks,
So
Derek. Been a pleasure to
thank
be
you,
here.
once again, Scott. So a big thank you to today's guest, Scott McArthur. Please do get in touch. And I forgot to do this while Scott was on. But if you want to get in touch with Scott, there is Scott's hashtag. You can get search for it on social media. Get in touch with Scott at sculptureconsulting.com. Look for his name. You'll find him everywhere, LinkedIn, Facebook. So that's how to get in touch with Scott. So there will be a live replay of this episode next week, and the video will be available at some point on my YouTube channel. So I look forward to seeing, well, hopefully all of you, but maybe some of you in a fortnight's time. So goodbye for now.